Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato ma Satkamayam Tamaso ma Jyotirgamayam Mrityorma Amritam Gamayam Aviravirma Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we take a closer look at one of the important themes with which the fourth chapter of the Gita begins. And that is the concept of the avatar, the divine incarnation. We have seen up to this point that Krishna gave the essence of his entire teaching was given in the second chapter, reminding Arjuna of his primary identity and then showing him through the path of Karma Yoga how to purify his heart in order to become fit to be able to realize that true spiritual identity in his heart. We also saw how among the obstacles that can come in this quest to regain our own identity are desire and anger, and what kind of obstacles they present in spiritual life. Now, one of the questions that can come, and which probably may have entered Arjuna's mind, is how did Krishna know all this? From where did this knowledge come? And that's something that we can understand today, because when we read something or when we hear someone, we want to know, wonderful as this information and knowledge is, from where did this book or where did this person get that knowledge? So what is the source from which it came? And that's how this chapter 4 begins. And it begins with some very interesting observations. Krishna tells Arjuna, probably anticipating that kind of question, probably thinking that Arjuna might be wondering from where did all this knowledge come to Krishna. And so he answers by, in a way that raises another question from Arjuna. So what Krishna tells him is that this knowledge I first gave long back. I gave this knowledge to the sun, and the sun then passed from the sun, it went to Manu, and then from Manu it went to Ikshvaku. And now, this yoga, the teaching of yoga, the sun, now what does it mean that Krishna gave it to the sun? Now, not clearly this bright and adorable as the sun is, it's still a material object. So it's clearly not the material object, but the deity presiding over this brightest source of light known to humanity. In other words, I imparted this to someone from a divine sphere. And then we come to Manu, which we could say is a kind of a prehistoric figure. And then further after that, Manu passed it on to a later, an Ikshvaku, was another great king of a solar dynasty. So what Krishna is telling Arjuna is that this yoga I have imparted it long, long back, and through these different sources, it has now come. But, evam, in the second verse you will see, evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sa kale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. Parampara. This is what we saw last week when we celebrated Guru Purnima, how everything comes from one generation to the next, how there is a lineage. So this knowledge of yoga also has a very long lineage. And so that's what parampara means. So what Krishna is saying is, this knowledge that I have imparted you, and I am continuing to impart you, has had a long, long history. Sa kale neha mahata yogo nashtaha. Now, over the years, as this thing was being passed from one generation to the next, this yoga declined in this world. That seems to be somehow the nature of life itself. Everything over time declines. But it's not a linear movement. We have seen that when we looked at the concept of yajna, how everything is cyclical. So yes, it declines, but then there is a regeneration again. The human body. When we are young, we are active, we are energetic, there's vitality, and then again, as we grow older, with the passage of time, there is a decline. But then, after death and a rebirth, there is a regeneration again. In a way, that's something that experts say would likely happen as it had happened in the past with all pandemics and epidemics also. They say that over time, however virulent the virus may be in the beginning, with the passage of time, its power becomes less and less and less. So it may not disappear overnight, but it will become less powerful. It declines, but then, hopefully not too soon again, but another pandemic might come. So that's how everything is, cyclical. So the knowledge of yoga, exactly in the same way, Krishna is saying, it declined over time. Now that knowledge which had declined over time, Krishna tells Arjuna, that is what I have given you. Because you are a great friend of mine and you're a great devotee, I have now passed on that knowledge. Now, obviously, with that kind of an introduction to the subject, Arjuna obviously had a question, and that was, this doesn't make sense, because remember, at the human level, Arjuna and Krishna were more or less at the same age. They were cousins. And so now Arjuna hears Krishna saying, I imparted it long back. I imparted it, not that it was imparted by someone. I imparted it. And so Arjuna asked Krishna, how could you have done that? All these figures that you mentioned, there is Manu, Ikshvaku, the sun, they were long, long before you were born. How could you have given that knowledge to them? And then Krishna says in verse 5 that I have had many births, like you, Arjuna, you have had many births too. The difference is, I remember all of my past births. And most of us don't remember everything in this birth itself, what to speak about past births. So that's the difference. All of us have had many births, but Krishna says he remembers all these past births, but the rest of us don't. And then look at verse 6, it's very important. Ajopi san avyayatma bhutanam ishvaropi san prakritim swam adhisthaya sambhavami atmamayaya. Though I am unborn, of changeless nature and Lord of beings, Yet, subjugating my Prakriti, I come into being by my own Maya. So that's one way Krishna says how his coming into being is different from the coming into being of Arjuna. Although they are cousins, although they are more or less the same age, but when Krishna took birth, he came out of his own free will. It was not karma that caused Krishna's birth, while the birth of Arjuna and the rest of us, we don't ever seem to have much choice about it. Not only do we not remember whether anybody asking us, do you want to be born? And where would you like to go? What would you like to be born as? No one asked us. All that we found is we suddenly found ourselves into this world. There's a lot of things in this world we had no choice about. I think it was Voltaire who said, God gave me my relatives. Thank God I can choose my friends. So we might think, at least as far as our immediate family is concerned, we really didn't have much choice. But at least it feels as if there is some choice we do have. At least we can choose what kind of people we want to mingle with, what kind of friends we would like to have. Now, whether even in that are we really free, we can think about that. But at least superficially it does seem that we have some choice, but there are some other factors in our life over which we did not have any choice. So Krishna is saying here that he was born out of his own choice. And then verses 7 and 8 are among the most quoted verses in the Gita. That gives a rationale for why would someone want to be born of their own choice into this world. Let's look at these verses. You must have heard them many, many times. In fact, years ago when there was that famous TV serial, the title sequence, it had these two verses. So people who have seen that serial are very familiar with these verses. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Whenever there is decline of dharma and a rise of adharma, then I body myself forth. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of dharma, I come into being in every age. So let's dwell a little bit on this. From the way Krishna has described so far, it does make it obvious that Krishna is not an ordinary person, that there is clearly something very special about him. How did this idea of the avatar develop in human consciousness? The word avatar or avatarana literally in Sanskrit means descending, the one who has descended. So it's the act of coming down. And it seems almost obvious that human beings have heard about some extraordinary people in history, or perhaps have even seen them during their own lifetimes, of some people who were so special that one begins to wonder that whether they are entirely human. Now, of course, we know that although we share a common humanity, that even no matter how much we speak about the ideal of equality, everyone's equal, yes, I mean, that's true. And yet, we also know at some level everyone is not equal. Yes, everyone should have equal rights. No one should exploit anybody else. All those great values we all cherish, and we should cherish. So we understand the value of equality. At the same time, when we look around the world, and we look at our own selves, and we look at the people around us, we know that in many respects, we are not equal. For one thing, different people have different physical strength, for instance. Not everybody is equally strong. Not everyone has the same mental capacity. Some people have great willpower, some people don't. Some people have tremendous power to feel, the power of feeling emotions. Some people don't. And that's why not everyone gets the Nobel Prize. Not everyone is recognized as a genius. So there is inequality in the world. So while that kind of inequality we can understand at some level, there are sometimes some extraordinary beings who seem not just unequal, but the gap that separates their personality from ours is just too big, too huge. Because sometimes when we see people who are extraordinarily gifted, if we believe in rebirth, we might say, well, these are some of the skills and samskaras they brought with them from their previous birth. That's one explanation. The other explanation is maybe this person had more opportunities than someone else did. A third explanation is maybe this person worked very hard to attain whatever excellence they have attained in any field. Or a fourth explanation is maybe a little of all of these may be true. But there are these beings who exert so much power, not only among their contemporaries, but for generations together. That doesn't seem to be a skill set that has been attained merely through hard work or merely through better opportunities. It seems something very special. It's about such people then we begin to wonder, who are they? And human beings, who they are, we create categories. Then we say, oh, these are a set of people, these are ordinary people, or these are worldly people. In spiritual life, the word worldly people comes very often. These are worldly or materialistic people. These are spiritual people. Then among the spiritual people, then we say, well, these people, this is a saint, or this is a mystic. This one is a holy man or holy woman. Or this one is a prophet. So we create these kind of categories. Now the highest among these different categories that human beings have invented stands the avatar. So the avatar is one where we see someone who looks human in many respects, but the moment we try to think of them as human beings, it suddenly appears that no, there's not just humanity in there. There is something very divine in there. So we begin to wonder whether it's a human being that has acquired excellence and risen to that height, or maybe God from that height has come down somehow to meet the human beings. So the avatar can be seen as the threshold, the meeting point, the junction. If we say this is the human sphere, this is the divine sphere, then that threshold which separates the two, an avatar can be said to be someone dwelling on that threshold. It's a little bit like they say in quantum physics. I'm even afraid to say anything about quantum physics because I'm no specialist. But from what a layman's understanding is, it seems that when you try to think about, say, the characteristic of energy, of light, or even of electrons, or please don't mind if I make some obvious mistakes. But the idea was that the moment you try to think about its movement in terms of wave, it suddenly then feels like the moment you observe it, it becomes more like a particle. The moment you try to think about it as a particle, then it shows characteristics of a wave. You can't really pin it down. An avatar is a little bit like that. The moment you try to think about these extraordinary beings in human terms, they suddenly don't fit the description. They suddenly look, no, they are very divine. The moment you try to look upon them as divine beings, they don't seem to fit that description either fully. They're like, no, they look pretty much human. They seem to be doing the things that human beings do. So that's where an avatar is. Swami Vivekananda, as a young man, before he formally took monastic vows, his name was Narendranath. And so there was this a homeopath doctor, Dr. Sarkar, who used to come and treat Sri Ramakrishna during his last illness. And he was a man of science, and he had great respect for Ramakrishna as a holy man, but he somehow didn't like the idea of people adoring him, worshipping him, thinking of him as a divine incarnation, as an avatar. And so Vivekananda, then a university student, so he said, his understanding was this. He said that just as in, if you go to some microorganisms, the dividing line between botany and zoology, there is a threshold when some of these microorganisms, it's difficult to say whether it is really a living creature or it's a plant, whether it's something that is a threshold between the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. And so he said an avatar is a little bit like that, similar to what I mentioned before about whether they are human or divine, or they are just on the threshold of the two. Now, be that as it may, another question that can come is, if it is true that they have descended from above rather than ascended from below, why would they do it? Why would God want to descend? Why would this divine power descend on earth? Again, we don't know, but nothing stops us from thinking about it. Nothing stops us from contemplating the possible reasons of why this might have happened. In in Christianity we know, for instance, when similar question came, when they looked at the personality of Jesus, again, such an extraordinary being who looked fully human at one level, but also fully divine. So what, is he divine or is he human? Or is he both? And why would someone so divine want to come and dwell among humans? And because the idea of sacrifice, the concept of sacrifice was very strong in those days, as it is even now. So one of the explanation was that God sent his Son to come and help the world. Human beings are suffering, so God almost like sacrificed his Son to come and take upon himself the suffering of the world. So the rationale was provided of why this avatar, who is identified as the Son of God, would come down. So there was one explanation of why an incarnation might appear in our midst. A similar question, when it arose in the minds of people at a different time in history, in a different part of the world, their answer was similar, but expressed in a different language. Yes, to remove the suffering, but how would they do that? And that's what is described here in verse 7 and 8. So according to these two verses here, God comes down when dharma declines, when adharma increases. And one of the major thing that this descent of the divine occurs is to establish dharma once again. We've seen earlier, and that's how Krishna begins the discussion of how this knowledge of yoga declines. And I said before that that's just how life is. Things decline and then there is a resurgence again. So just like the yoga that was imparted, the knowledge of yoga that was imparted through generations declined, and then Krishna said he has now come to revive it. So similarly, dharma, which is what holds the world together, which is what holds living creatures together, when that declines, somehow this divine power descends on this earth to restore that dharma. That is what dharma samsthapana. Samsthapana is re-establishing dharma. Now, what is it that leads to, what is it that creates this decline in dharma? And that is, those people who hold up dharma, those people who follow a righteous life, they are being tormented, they are being put down by the opposite, the people who don't follow dharma. And that's why I come for the protection of the good, the destruction of the wicked. So the perpetrators of adharma are put down, and those people who uphold dharma, they are the ones who are protected and encouraged. And that's how you restore dharma. And that's essentially what we do. If you want to restore health to a community, I mean, well, that's the kind of a pandemic we are passing through right now. So what do? Make sure that those who are healthy, that they remain healthy. You tell them the ways to protect themselves, and then those who have caught this virus, find a way to destroy that virus so that they become healthy again. That's how you establish health back into the community. So dharma is like that. So those people who are practicing dharma need encouragement, need support, and those people who are trying to put hurdles in the path of dharma, those hurdles have to be removed. So that's a rationale given of how to remove suffering from the world and how to re-establish dharma. Now, when we actually see what do these great avatars do, when we look at the lives of Krishna and Rama in the way those lives have come down to us today, we see the destruction of the wicked really means just absolute destruction. There is not much talk of non-violence. If think about it, if you look at their lives, Krishna and Rama, they do destroy, physically destroy all these demons and Rakshasas. And so it's a little bit easy to understand the meaning of these two verses. But then when we come to more recent incarnations, closer to us in history, we look at the life of Jesus, of Prophet Muhammad, Chaitanya, Ramakrishna, Buddha. Well, they didn't kill anyone. So how did they destroy adharma? And then, of course, to understand and to align their lives with what these two verses say, an explanation is often given that they didn't really destroy people, but they destroyed the wickedness in the hearts of people. And so the demons, the invisible demons in our minds, that is what these avatars destroyed. And that is why it's in harmony with these two verses. Be that as it may, another question is, what does this establishment of dharma samsthapanam, how do we understand that phrase? It does not look, at least from whatever historical evidence is available to us, it doesn't look as if after these avatars came, the world changed, that there was complete dharma everywhere. There doesn't seem to be all that big a difference. In fact, when we see Krishna's life, Krishna was born in the Dwapara Yuga, so in the Indian idea of the cycles. So the golden age is called the Satya Yuga. And when things declined a little bit, then it is called the Treta Yuga. When things declined further, it is called Dwapara Yuga. And when things declined further still, it's called Kali Yuga. And they say that all of us now are in this fourth Yuga, when things have really declined. Now that's easy to believe. But as I said, it's not a linear movement. It will be cyclical. So again, the golden age will come. I mention these four ages because Krishna was born in this third of the yugas, Dwapara Yuga. According to one description, as soon as Krishna left his body, as soon as Krishna died, the Kali Yuga started. So, if Krishna came to establish dharma, there should have been an upward swing. We should have gone back to Treta Yuga or Golden Age. But it didn't happen. It went to Kali Yuga. So, what does it mean, establishment of dharma? Now, one way of understanding this is it's not in terms of numbers. It's not in terms of after an avatar comes, the majority of the people are going to be good. And either evil will be totally removed from this world or it will come under manageable limits. There is really no evidence for all of this. The world as we know it, no matter which segment of history we take a look at, it seems to be pretty much the world as the world always is. Yes, externally it changes, There are superficial changes in terms of the kind of buildings you have, the kind of your modes of transportation, and so on. But if you look at the human heart, it's a polarized world. There is good, but there is also evil. There is love, there is also hatred. There is unselfishness, but there is also a lot of selfishness. There is a lot of kindness, but there is also a lot of cruelty. And at any point in history, we find that both these extremes in every way were present. So in what way has the world changed? In fact, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, this was a discussion that often comes up. In fact, in one time, Ramakrishna encouraged his disciples to argue the point. What does really happens? What happens when an avatar comes? Why does the avatar come? And so on. One possible way of understanding that is that whenever an avatar comes, they leave behind a living tradition. They leave behind an inspiring ideal, an adorable form, which then provides support, which then provides power to earnest spiritual seekers. So it's not a numbers game. It's not that more than 50% of the people in the world should become good in order for the world to become good. Now, although I've used the word good and evil, I think I should clarify one other thing. No matter how much evil and wickedness we see in the world, I hold on to the belief that majority of the people in the world are still good. They may not be extraordinarily good. People have their own weaknesses. People have their own calculations. They have own self-interests. They can be selfish in many different sort of ways. But taking all that for granted, still, by and large, people are good. But also, there are people whose samskaras, whose ambitions, or the way their mind has gotten twisted for a variety of reasons, could be generating a lot of wickedness, a lot of evil, a lot of suffering for others. So these extraordinarily wicked people give the impression as if there is a lot of wickedness in the world. And in order to balance that, we need some extraordinarily good people to balance the extraordinary wickedness of some people. And most other people are in the middle. Neither too good nor too bad. A little bit of good, a little bit of bad. And so what an avatar does is to help create a core community of earnest spiritual seekers. And these community who become devoted to a specific descent of the divine, a specific avatar, a specific incarnation, they derive their spiritual sustenance and energy and inspiration from that source and transform their lives in such a way that this knowledge that the avatar imparts is then passed on to the next generation and next generation. And again, like everything in life, this will decline and another avatar will come to raise the level of dharma once again. But that does not mean that the earlier avatars become outdated. No, their part continues. But a new push that the humanity needs is provided by a new avatar. Now, one thing should always be kept in mind. We're speaking about the new avatar and many avatars. Do not think about these avatars as different people came at different points in history, as that's how they will look. Because the whole idea of the avatar, the incarnation, is it's the divine that comes down. And the divine is one. God is one. So if God chose to come in some form and some part of the world at some point in history, it's the same divine who comes in a different form and imparts the teaching in a different cultural setting in a different way. And it's the same divine then who will come in yet another form and give a teaching, again, suited to that time and age. So, although the avatars are many, God is one, because it's one God whose avatars, whose different forms, whose different manifestations appear at different points in history. And that's something that need to be kept in mind. And that's why you see in verse 9, Krishna says, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo vetti tattvataha tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. So one who knows that these extraordinary beings are special, that they are divine, and tries to understand them, tries to learn from them in that way, they are the ones who become free themselves. They are the ones who attain their goal of life. And then later on, there's one other verse I would like to draw your attention to. It comes in chapter 9, it's verse number 11. It goes like this. Avajananti mam mudha manushim tanumashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Unaware of my higher state, as the great Lord of beings, fools disregard me, dwelling in the human form. Now that's the great danger, that when these extraordinary beings come and we think about them as just another human being, yes, they are. It's so easy to be fooled that we don't recognize them. And not only do we not recognize them, but we treat them badly, or we don't learn from them, then it's we who are the losers. So identifying divinity requires a certain amount of clarity in our own mind. And that's why even during their lifetimes, all of these avatars, not everyone recognized them to be who they are. In the life of Jesus, if people knew who he truly was, would they have crucified him? Many of these other incarnations who came, the amount of obstacles and hardships that they were presented with by people who couldn't recognize who they were. And so, understanding an avatar, recognizing an avatar is not easy. In fact, we know in Ramakrishna's life, there were some, in fact, two of his disciples were among the first. Their names were Girish Ghosh and Ramchandra Datta, who publicly proclaimed him as an avatar. And most people were skeptical. They saw him as a holy man, as a saintly person. But avatar seemed like a too big a leap. And Ramakrishna himself used to laugh at these, when someone said, "You're an avatar," and he would say, No, I'm not an avatar. So, none of these avatars have come and publicly proclaimed themselves to be avatars, except on certain occasions to a certain core group of disciples or people who they felt would understand who their nature was, what their nature was. So a lot to understand, a lot to discuss about avatar. So this is something that we need to reflect on, of not only what Krishna means to us, but all these divine personages that have come in history, what they mean to us. Now, one thing I want to conclude with is this, that acknowledging someone as an avatar is not an absolute necessity. It's not as if, oh, if I don't acknowledge someone as an avatar, I will not benefit from them. It's not. That's something important to recognize. In the introduction to the Gita, Shankaracharya, he addresses this question that people might have about the avatar. And he uses a phrase, he says, Dehavan iva, jata iva. Iva in Sanskrit means as if. So he describes the avatar as someone who Dehavan iva, as if takes a human body. Jata iva, as if was born. Now this as if is very important, because if they were born like the way you and I were, then it is Prakriti, it is karma that has caused our birth. As I said in the beginning, no one asked us our choice. We just suddenly found ourselves here. But an avatar being special, they were born, but as if they were born, as if they have taken a body. So it is something different. So I would leave you with this idea about an avatar. There's never ever going to be a time when we'll be able to fully solve the mystery of the incarnation intellectually. No one has been able to do it. No one will be able to do it. The best we can do is try to understand this phenomenon, this mystery, as best we can with our limited understanding, using the limited tools of reasoning and logic that are available to us. But the truth, the reality of the avatar is to be experienced directly in our own hearts. And that's where, when we experience that reality, it goes beyond simple reasoning. It just goes beyond merely rationalizing all these thoughts and ideas. So I'll leave it at that. The avatar as a divine mystery. Someone who is so real, but someone who cannot be pinned down intellectually, but someone whose presence in our life can be experienced in a much more intense way through spiritual practice, through prayer, through worship, through meditation. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So we'll take a 5-minute break now, and if you have any comments and questions, we will take a look at them. Okay, so let's take a look at the questions. Could we think about the avatars as being able to exist in different planes of consciousness simultaneously? We could. How we think about these avatars is really left to us. Whichever way of thinking makes the best sense and satisfies our understanding, the avatar can be fit into our worldview, I think that should be fine. Will there be a next human avatar of Krishna? If Krishna has the option of being born, why isn't he here yet in Kali Yuga? There won't be an avatar of Krishna per se, because Krishna himself is an avatar of the divine. So the next avatar will be an avatar of the divine. And the question whether why has Krishna not been born in Kali Yuga is debatable, because there are people who believe that an avatar has come. There are so many avatars, and then how many of these personages who are being considered incarnation is being looked upon as, whether we are able to look upon them as an incarnation is really our own choice. So some people might say that an avatar has already come in Kali Yuga, but whether that was Krishna who has come or someone else, again, it's very difficult to say. If our essential nature is spirit, which is pure and is beyond good and evil, how does avatar help us realize our real nature? Simply that, yes, our true nature is spirit. We are divine by our real nature, but we don't feel that way right now. And the reason we don't feel that way is because of obstacles and hurdles. And what an avatar does through their life and their teachings is help us remove those obstacles, teach us how to remove those obstacles from our heart so that we realize our true nature. Belief in an avatar requires duality. In Advaita, does the concept disappear? Yes, in Advaita, all concepts disappear. It's not just that the avatar disappears in Advaita, but a person for whom the avatar comes down also disappears. So, I think I need to say something about Advaita. Even a person who holds Advaitic views, non-dualistic views, is still living in duality. Because if someone is experiencing non-duality, then that person is not even a person. That person doesn't even have a mind. What to speak of holding any views? So the practice of non-duality, holding non-dual views, all this occurs on a dualistic plane. And so as long as I am someone who's striving to attain, even if that ideal of non-duality, so long as I am the seeker, an avatar still is significant to me. So, in that sense, an avatar doesn't disappear, even if I hold non-dualistic views. My understanding of an avatar, of who this avatar is, that may be different from someone else's understanding of an avatar. But the avatar doesn't become irrelevant to me, even if I'm a non-dualist. To give another example would be, how real is an avatar? How real is my idea of God with some form, how real is my idea of God as a person? And the answer is that no matter what intellectual theories I might hold, it's kind of wonderful to say everything is consciousness and pure consciousness. But to think in practical terms, what does it even mean that there is only consciousness? I mean, what beyond just a feeling of oneness, it really doesn't do any good to me. The moment I try to think of the Supreme, as long as I see myself as a person, my Supreme Being, whether I admit it to myself or not, will be some kind of a person. As long as my own form, something that I see standing before a mirror every day, as long as my form has some semblance of reality, the form of the divine that I worship will be relevant. I cannot hold on to my form and then claim that, oh, God cannot have form. Why cannot God have form? If I can have form, God doesn't even have the power that I have. So the idea is that God beyond form, God who is not a person, will become real to me only when my own form, I don't cling to my own form. Only when I don't see myself as this one limited being. Then I can say I've truly entered into the non-dual world. But to hold on to my personality, my own form, and then try to downplay or disregard the role of an avatar is not very helpful. And I think that is something that needs to be kept in mind. And therefore, in my understanding, an avatar is as relevant to a spiritual seeker, even if that spiritual seeker holds non-dual views, as it may be to someone else who holds dualistic views. I don't think an avatar becomes irrelevant because of that. Since Brahman just is and doesn't really do anything, who or what decides that there is an imbalance that needs to be fixed and take a human form? Now, Brahman doesn't do anything is not really true. Well, it's really true. Okay, let me put it this way. Brahman really doesn't do anything, but unreally, there is no such word as unreally, but you get the point. Everything that is happening because of Brahman, because Brahman alone has become all this. That's what the Upanishad says. Not really, but still, even unreally, it's Brahman. So Brahman, if we want to continue using that analogy, we could say that if Brahman forgets that I am Brahman, that's how that one becomes the many. And of that many, one extraordinary part of that many is this personal God, a part of whom might come as an avatar. And me, I am a small little part among those many. So the avatarhood or the Saguna Ishvara is as real as the Jiva is. As long as I'm an individual being, the supreme being in the form of an avatar or a supreme being in the form of a personal God is relevant. In order for that supreme being to become irrelevant, my own individuality should become irrelevant. And so as long as these two are relevant to one another, it's that supreme being then who notices, yes, there is imbalance, because there is multiplicity, there is inequality, there is imbalance, and that imbalance needs to be somehow minimized. So a rationale can be found for the descent of the divine to establish dharma. But all of this multiplicity stays or folds together. By that I mean, just like our dream, everything in the dream world is valid as long as the dream lasts. As soon as the dream is over, everything vanishes. So, if someone has fallen ill in the dream, then that dream medication, it may be unreal, but that dream medication will cure that dream illness because they both belong to the same plane. And so as long as these apparently different realities in this diverse world seem to be existing, it's possible for it to happen. What is the difference between an avatar and a self-realized person? That's simple. An avatar is seen as a descent of the divine from above coming down. And a self-realized person is one who is from below has gone up. So, now what exactly happens when this person goes up or that person comes down, that's the mystery of it. But if we speak about an avatar is the one who comes down, a realized person is the one who goes up. And as you can understand, the terms up and down are very relative. They are just from our own relative sense. Is there a difference between the idea of a bodhisattva in Buddhism and avatar? Now, it's not always possible to exactly equate one concept from one tradition with a different concept from another tradition. They might share some similarity, but they are not exactly identical. So, one way the bodhisattva is understood in the Buddhist tradition is of a person who has reached almost on the point of nirvana, who has been able to find the way out of suffering and to enter nirvana. But having reached that point, they look back and they say, oh, this rest of the world is suffering. I just cannot go and get my nirvana. And so they come back to help. So it's not so much coming down as in avatar, but you could say it's like taking a U-turn. So not having, because once you attain nirvana, you can't come back. So these are just before attaining nirvana, coming back to help the world. Whereas an avatar is seen as someone who is coming from beyond in this plane. Again, two different ways of looking at it. In functional terms, there may not be much difference. It may not be so easy to immediately say, oh, this person is a bodhisattva and the other person is an avatar, because functionally they might be seem to be doing similar functions in the world, but conceptually, this is the difference between the two. By establishment of dharma, can one think that an avatar corrects the distinction between dharma and adharma, which has become corrupted? Yes, the distinction between dharma and adharma always is, but but for sustenance of the world, the dharma will have to be dominant. There has to be a greater distinction. The dharma has to be more powerful. That's what makes life move ahead. Now, when dharma becomes less powerful and adharma goes, then it's almost like a car, and when it's almost getting out of gas, and then you have a warning signal coming and saying, find the nearest gas station to go, because otherwise the car is going to stop. Now, I don't know whether this is a good analogy, but one way would be to say that that's when the world's gas is almost coming to an end. That's when the Lord says, let me go down and fill more gas so that this car of the world creation can move for some distance. And again, the gas is again going to go down, and then one more avatar has to come. So that would be a way to look at it. What is the main difference between good and evil? Sometimes it seems to be subjective and can be quite confusing. This is sometimes said to be a more serious problem of the contemporary world. Sometimes it is called moral relativism, that there is no such thing as something really good or really bad, because everything depends on circumstances and time and so on. And so what I feel to be good is good, what I feel is bad is bad. I don't think that's a very good way to think, because that really creates a lot of problems. So then how do we define? Is it merely subjective, or is there an objective way to define what is good or evil? I think there is a way which somewhere is it's a midway between subjective and objective. I don't know if that makes sense. But the idea is, one way to determine what is good or bad would be, if something, there are really two different ways to look at it. One way is to think that if, for a spiritual seeker, whatever takes me nearer to my spiritual ideal, helps me go nearer to my spiritual ideal, is good. Whatever takes me away from my spiritual ideal is bad. So that's how a spiritual seeker can look at it. So it is subjective in a sense. I have to apply this yardstick, but it's objective in the sense, if I follow this, it will show objective results. I will really go closer to my goal if I practice what I see as good, and I will really go away from my goal if I give in to what I see is bad. So it is a subjective assessment, but with objective results. Another helpful way, equally helpful way, is what Swami Vivekananda often emphasized, and that is, anything that makes me strong, either physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, spiritually, at any of these levels is good. Anything that makes me weak, again, physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, intellectually, is bad. So these are at least two distinct ways to help us figure out what is good or bad. And I find this to be a better way to deal with the problem of good and evil than to have an objective list. These are the 10 things that are good, these are another 10 things that are bad, which might be helpful to people who are not able to apply these yardsticks themselves. But that kind of an objective listing is problematic, because there are things in life which, in a certain set of circumstances, can be defined as good, but in a certain other set of circumstances would become bad. So to objectively define good or bad is actually quite difficult. In the 6th verse of 4th chapter, Krishna uses the word Maya to mean power. Elsewhere, the word Maya is used to mean illusion. Yes, the word Maya is understood in many different ways. Literally, Maya simply means that which is not. It's the power of ignorance. So ignorance is a power, but that power is what produces an illusion. Ignorance has the power to make things appear as they are not. And the classical example is, of course, of a rope that is mistaken for a snake in a dimly lit room. Now, because I'm ignorant that it's a rope, I think that it's a snake. So then illusion of a snake is created because of my ignorance of the reality of the rope. Similarly, sleep. Sleep is a kind of Maya as well, because sleep is ignorance. I forget who I am, I forget where I am when I fall asleep. And therefore the illusion of a dream world is an illusion, but in the dream it all appears to be real. So Maya can get sometimes referred to as a power, sometimes as an illusion, sometimes as ignorance, depending on context. But it's a combination of all these ideas, because they are all very related ideas. If we are all divine and simply don't realize our true potential as Brahman, how are we different from the avatars? Well, avatars know their potential and we don't. And so, yes, we are different. It's a little bit like Swami Vivekananda once said, it's like asking the question, well, plants are living beings, we are living beings. What is the difference? Well, the difference is you go and cut a plant and you go and cut your own leg. You know the difference. So merely saying that the two are same, therefore there is no difference, is not very helpful. If avatar comes when evil has pervaded the good and helped the suffering masses, why has God not intervened now? There is so much global suffering. Again, for God's intervention, it's not always necessary that an avatar should come. Because every time any of us think, oh, the problem has become a lot, then pretty much every week an avatar will have to come down. So I don't think it's necessary. I think the power of the incarnations who have already come is already helping us deal with the situation. And therefore, it is just like, think about it this way. Those of us who have a medical person at home may not realize this, but the body being what it is going to have some aches and pains all the time. If not in one person in the family, someone else. But we don't say, oh, there is an ache and pain. Why don't some doctor come and stay with us all through so that whenever there is any pain, the doctor can cure it? We realize, yes, there are doctors around. They may not always be easily available. Getting an appointment may not be easy, but we don't say there should be a doctor in every family, because every family has something going on sometime or the other. So similarly, to kind of expect an avatar to come down every time any of us feel helpless may not seem very necessary. But again, who am I to know whether an avatar should come or not? So if we really badly want an avatar, maybe an avatar might come. I'm no one to decide whether an avatar should come after a long time or a quick time. I'll be happy if avatar comes now. Let's see. After an avatar leaves, the followers who want to spread their message become fanatics and are ready to kill or forcefully convert other people. Does this create more dharma? Sure, there are some people who will misuse or misinterpret the teachings of an avatar, but there are also other people who use them well to not only transform their own lives, but become forces of good in their own way. So, the world, as I said, these polarities will always remain. There will be people to promote dharma, and there will be other people who would put obstacles. That reality won't change. But what the avatar does is to try to restore the balance so that goodness will always have a chance to thrive and prosper in this world. Second law of thermodynamics says everything goes from order to disorder. By restoring order to some extent, is God breaking the law? Well, God is above the law. So, God is not bound by that law. And only when God will restore order will the law of thermodynamics have a chance to create disorder again. Because if it's already disorder, then after some time, things have to become orderly for the law to again start functioning. That's one way. Is there any harm in considering someone to be an avatar if they are not truly an avatar? If we can see the divine everywhere and in everyone, wouldn't that be ideal? Yes, I mean, the way the concept of avatar is developed in religious literature, that's the kind of idea we saw today. But in some sense, we could say everyone is an avatar. When ultimately, if we are all Brahman, and then we have all descended, fallen down from that highest state. But then that's not the way the word avatar gets used in religious literature. And that is why you will remember when Ramakrishna spoke with Vivekananda, and the last, towards the end, when Sri Ramakrishna told Narendranath, he said, he who was Krishna, he who was Rama, is now born as Ramakrishna in this body. But then he added this phrase, not in your Vedantic sense. Because if you take from that point of view, everyone is divine, everyone is this thing, and so then all the distinctions don't make sense. But if we want to look upon the way avatar is understood in religious literature, then we can see everyone as divine, but we cannot see everyone as an avatar. It's a little bit like the example that is often given is that if you have a different ornaments or jewelry, say made of gold, So there is a necklace, there is a bangle, there is all the anklets and so on. And they could be images, maybe Ganesha made of gold, and Ganesha's vehicle, a mouse made of gold. Now all these as gold, they are all same. But Ganesha is still Ganesha. A mouse is still a mouse. A bracelet and a bangle is still a bangle. So you cannot say, oh, the bangle is Ganesha or the mouse is Ganesha. No, you cannot say that because as Ganesha, Ganesha is special. But if you kind of melt all these gold objects, it will be just gold. So an avatar is special. The rest of us are jivas. But if you melt all of these, then only Brahman will remain. That's a rather crude way of putting it. Is it possible that an avatar was manifested in many beings at the same time? Again, there is no way to answer this question one way or another. If that is how one would like to see it, and if that way of understanding helps a person grow spiritually, I think that's fine. But if you look at the texts where the concept of avatara is developed and described, we don't find any evidence of avatar being simultaneously being present. So textually, it does seem as if avatar comes periodically, only when dharma declines. So that's the difference between what evidence comes to us from religious texts and how we would like to see it. Okay. So thank you very much for all your questions. They were very, very good questions. I often get good feedback from people who are streaming, and also those who later on listen to these talks on YouTube and elsewhere, that they are very impressed with the quality of questions that are asked. So please keep it up. Have a good week ahead, and next week we will continue this study of the Gita. Let's conclude with the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.